This time in the Magick Kitchen, we are joined again by the wonderful Nicholas Pearson to talk about psychic and magical self-defense.
I'm Leandra Witchwood.
And I'm Elise Wells.
And welcome to the Magick Kitchen podcast, where we talk about magic, kitchen witchcraft, herbs,
and everything in between.
The Magick Kitchen podcast is funded and supported by thewitchwoodteahouse.com, offering a variety of hand-blended loose leaf teas as well as loose herbs for all of your ritual, spell work, wellness, and everyday enjoyment needs. If you would like to support this podcast while sipping a great cup of tea, head over to thewitchwoodteahouse.com and find the magic that's in store for you. Where to begin? You want to start?
Yes, I do want to start because I just got back.
Go.
Literally like 2 hours ago, I just got back from my 3-day deep descent into the woods. If you saw it on Instagram, I shared a little bit about it, but basically, I don't think I shared this background anywhere, but in August or September, we were preparing to come back to the US in the coming couple of months, and I got this like little ping from the universe, like, you need to retreat. And at first I thought it meant find another retreat to go on, or and then I thought, well, maybe it just means like go to the US for a longer visit, which we did. Because to me, like visiting the land that raised me feels like a retreat, you know, it's a return to roots. It's so healing. And then when I got back to the US, the call was go alone. That was the words, go alone. I'm like, go alone where? To the grocery store? Go. And it was like, to the woods alone. And so I started every day going out to the woods here. And then the woods were like, go to more woods. I wish I could remember the exact words, but it wasn't really words. It was this feeling of like, more, quiet.
More.
Like those were like the singular words. Like anybody who's spoken with tree spirits or plant spirits, you know that they don't communicate in like conversation. It's like,
no,
it's sensations. And I just got this, like, I'm supposed to be surrounded by nothing but woods. And so I tried for October, November, December. I tried so hard to find one night. I was like, I just need one night out in nature. And I couldn't find anywhere that would let you book just one night. I couldn't find anywhere that would let you do, like, everything was far away. I found, like, it was crazy. And it just didn't work with the holidays. Like, I couldn't even find one single night that I could get away. And I went to my altar and was like, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to ignore this call at all. Like, I'm 100% listening. I hear you. But I can't right now. This was in December. And I just got this sensation of like, okay, but are you going to do it? And I was like, okay, geez, all right. So the first week of the year, I pretty quickly, without thinking, I just picked the first nearest state park and I booked 3 nights. And it wasn't until after I booked it that Anana kind of leaned over my shoulder, like at my computer desk, like looking at like in my ear. She's just kind of like there, like, that's exactly how many days I descended. And I was like, oh, that's what we're doing. So I brought my drum. I brought about 9 books. I brought food, which I actually was thinking, like, should I do a more spiritual diet? And I wish I had, but I truly just didn't prepare. I kind of forgot. I'm a Taurus. I don't know how I did this, but I forgot about the food part until like the day before. And so I did have some stuff, but I wish I had had more like nourishing spiced stews and like warm food, because it was like well below freezing
cold
the entire time I was there. And I was drumming in the woods with gloves on, and I was hiking alone. And like, it would have been nice to have warm stuff, but I did bring chai. I brought masala chai tea, and I descended. It was really powerful. I'm still processing because this was literally a few hours ago, but it was really, really powerful because I got what I needed and more. Like one of my biggest takeaways for this, what I wanted one of my biggest takeaways to be was, without getting too personal, I'm going to post something a little more personal on Patreon for the real ones who I know are here for it. But the biggest takeaway professionally that I wanted, and just witchily, if that's a word, was like...
Witchily, I like it. We're making up our own words. It's okay.
Yeah. We're writers. That's what we do.
It's what we do.
So I just wanted to know more what the red thread needs to say. Like, what does this course need to be? And who else needs to be included? And the Cliff Notes version, Freya came through vibrantly. Like, and I did not pre-tell Leandra this stuff because I wanted authentic reactions. So Freya, as soon as I thought I was imposing it at first, because I was like, she's so, excuse me, like if anybody's offended by this, but I was like, she's so hot. Like, who is this gorgeous hot blonde? Like, flirting with me around these corners on the astral plane around my tower. Like, she was doing this like very like flirtatious kind of like follow me sort of thing.
Huh.
And she ended up leading me to, long story short, she now has her own week in the red thread. Like, she was like, you forgot me. Like, she's very playful about it, very flirtatious, but like, girl, you got to put me in there. So she's in there now. And yeah, that was the biggest surprise to me, was how strongly Freya was with me. Even in the books I was reading, like accidentally they were discussing Satyr and Galder and the practices that she brought to, like, this was after that experience. Like my first trance, she's the one who came through. And so that's what I did for 3 days. I drummed and tranced, ate a little bit, slept a little bit, drummed and tranced. And it was like, and read a lot. And it was transformative. Like, I think I wrote probably close to 11,000 words.
Wow. Good.
And that was the other thing that came through, was my next book. I've been working on it, but it was just feeling disjointed. And I actually outlined the whole thing and weirdly wrote the conclusion.
Huh.
Do you ever do that? Well, like write the conclusion first?
Yes. So that's one of the habits that I work with, is I look at the end result first.
Yes.
What do I want it to look
mapping.
like first? Yeah.
That's what they taught us.
I map backward.
Mm-hmm. In education school, that's exactly what they taught us.
Yeah. I want to know what the result is first, and then I go through the process. Like, what do I want to achieve from this? And I always attributed it to like my corporate Franklin Covey days. You know, they teach you to focus on what matters most. That was the famous line, what matters most. And basically, you know, start with the end in mind. So that's one of those things that I've always done, is the backward mapping. So it doesn't surprise me that you came up with the conclusion first.
And then it all came flooding. Yeah, it was. Yeah. And that's how I teach usually too, is like, what do I want people to get out of this? Yes. That's how I build these courses from a pragmatic standpoint. Yeah. The other 90% is definitely the downloads and that was the other thing, is I was like, I need a permission here. Like we never need permission from spirit, but whenever, like, let's be honest, like, we have to live in a modern capitalist driven world. And so we have to make choices that we don't have ancient precedent to go by. You know, like these priestesses were funded by the state. They were funded by aristocracy. Most of them were from extreme privilege. And they were given those roles because their family had money to fund the temples, kind of thinking of like, you know, celebrities and their bribery for Ivy Leagues, right? Same thing, but for priestesshood. Yeah. Or
the next shoe you're going to buy.
Yeah. So yeah, I wanted that conversation to have as much space as it needed to make sure that what I was teaching was what I'm allowed to share, you know, because sometimes, like, I was very nervous about even telling people like, this is what's going to be in it, because I was like, what if it's not? What if at the end, like, I'm not really allowed to share this stuff? But
and what if it was just meant for you? You know, you're going in there thinking of what you're going to share to everybody, but they're like, no, this is for you only.
Exactly.
And there's a lot of that. Like I think social media kind of skews that perception, because that we're supposed to be included in everyone's epiphanies or spiritual journeys. But sometimes the downloads that we get are meant only for us, not for anybody else, until later, maybe, you know, later it comes out.
And that's kind of what I wanted to double check on, because I have 10 years of priestess teachings, like downloads, like personal gnosis workings that I've done with massive success with Inanna, with Aphrodite, with Hecate. And like I always say, Hecate is like my grandmother because my high priestess works with her. So Hecate's always just kind of been like this like outside force of like, and one of my coven mates who came up with me in initiation, she works with Loki, which is kind of funny because now I'm like getting more in with trickster energy too. And Loki says the same thing. He'll say, let's ask grandma what she thinks. And then they'll call in Hecate and ritual. Like, it's so funny.
I like that.
So anyway, it feels really good to know that I'm not going to be sharing anything I'm not welcome to. And actually, like, Inanna was like, no, like, why do you think I told you these things? Like, you're here to share them. So
nice.
I'm so
you got
excited.
that confirmation. Good.
Yeah. So if anyone's like still thinking about the red thread, if this conversation pushed you over and you're like, all right, that's that, I gotta do it. We don't start till Tuesday, so you still have time to join us. Doors will close on Tuesday because once that container opens, it is sealed. But please join us. If I still have availability for some calls too. We can get to know each other before you join. So you can set that up. The link in the show notes.
I feel like I'm winding down from so much stuff. So we just finished the Unbound Priestess Summit, which was awesome.
It was so good.
Oh my God. The panels were my favorite part. Like the discussions we had the first day and the second day, like they were just amazing discussions, and getting to know all these priestesses was amazing. But okay, so here's the weird thing. So I didn't mention this before because I'm still processing it, but so years ago, I was, you know how when you're in your baby stages of witchcraft, you're kind of like feeling out like who wants to work with me, what deities want to come forward. And I had this one that came forward that I've never seen before. I never saw any lore about it. And it wasn't until after I talked with my mentor that she led me to who this deity was, because I'm going to describe it because the description, hopefully you'll get it and hopefully you'll understand it, because it was so stunning. So the way in my trance, the way this deity came to me was it was dark. And in the darkness, suddenly I saw lines of light. They were gold, specifically gold, that started forming a mask, a black mask. So, and then like they were really delicate lines. They were really like minimalistic lines. So they started like forming the jawline, the lips, the nose, and then the eyes. That's really all you saw of the mask, with these gold lines that started making this face. And in the middle of the forehead of this mask was a gold sun. I'm like, who the hell is this? And it wasn't until like, I don't know, even like I was working with this deity, had no idea who it was because there was no descriptions of this formation, this manifestation anywhere. Couldn't find it. And I later found out that it was the dark Apollo. It was the eclipse Apollo. And I was like, what? Is that even real? Like, is this my imagination? So for the longest time, I've been working with the shadow side of Apollo, which is kind of where my journey into shadow work started. So this is 20 plus years ago. And we kind of like, we haven't worked with each other for a very long time. He's always been there, but not really working with him. And after the summit, here he comes again. He's back in presence. He's full force. Like he's sitting here with me right now.
Oh, I love that, because so that's kind of cool, because one of the things I reflected on in my descent this week, the past few days, literally we're talking about the same exact time frame. While Apollo was returning to you, I reflected on how I think my time with him is not done, because I am leading a retreat to Delphi, but he's like very much at the threshold, or at the edges of my path. He's like, he's stepping back. He's like, I'm here, but I'm not, like, you're doing this now. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. That's so cool.
Like as he stepped back from you, he's stepping forward to me. Oh, interesting. Woo.
That is so cool.
That gives me like whole full body chills.
Me too. Oh, I love that.
I'm curious, path, like where it is. And I think part of the reason why he's stepping forward is because I'm leaning into my more creative side. So part of my self-care is tapping back into my creative side. So I'm re-familiarizing myself, reigniting my like watercolor journey that I started many years ago.
Oh.
And so I'm every day I'm taking time. Like that's my break. That's my personal care time is I take a break from all the work I'm doing and I practice watercolor, paint whatever, butterflies, mushrooms, whatever. Maybe I'll post them on my social media when I'm, when I'm feeling extra spicy. I don't know. Okay. But it comes at such a critical time because as the time of recording, January 16th, we start the Gardens of the Mystic program. And the container, like the live
tonight?
container is the 16th, tomorrow.
16th. Oh, tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow.
Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah. So Thursday night. And so we begin with the primordial garden. We begin with the chaos as a catalyst for our path to grow and create and change. And we actually got a really cool message from a listener about that primordial idea, the idea of chaos being a catalyst for change, as being your friend. And I love it because the whole reason I started the Unbound Priestess podcast was to lean into these ideas that are not always talked about. The idea that we can look at the chaos in our life and we can use that as a lesson. We can use it as a message of what needs to change. Who in our life is causing us chaos, and how do we fix that? How do we set better boundaries? How do we give ourselves more fortitude? And so the Dark Apollo coming into this, I'm curious, like what's going to happen next, because we're starting this program. He's stepping away from you and stepping in to my life. I'm very curious about what's going to happen. I'm very curious about where this is going to go.
I have a prediction that you will now transition, because he's just now back in your life. So I think you're going to transition into working with light Apollo, like the Apollo Maybe. I know, who is like androgynous in an effeminate way. He's sassy, direct. Actually, really, if you watch Cribopolis, it's that like adult animation show that started in 2024. It's really cute. I love it.
Is it? Okay. I haven't watched it.
Highly recommend, because it's like, it's ancient Greece, and like it's this comedy. It's a sitcom in ancient Greece where like a made up goddess named, it's like Discordia, but she's a real goddess. Something similar. Deliria. She's a made up goddess of delirium. And like her son she's just trying to get him off her back. So he's the king of Cribopolis. Crapopolis. Like literally that's
Crapopolis. I like that.
And he's like trying to make sure that they're remembered in history. But the joke, of course, is that they're not real. So like, but what if they were? Like, it's very layered. It's very funny.
Gotcha.
But in that show, Hermes is so much like Apollo is for me in real life. Like when I was watching it, I was like, is that Apollo? And then he's like flying around. I was like, he must be Hermes. But they are brothers. So
for sure.
I'm excited to see if you end up meeting like the Delphic Apollo, the open-hearted, know thyself Apollo.
Yes. Well, and I think really that leans into the shadow aspect of him. Why I'm in the shadow with him is because it's about going into that void and creating from the void.
Yeah. Finding your light there.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you can't have light without dark. So Apollo can exist without the dark side too.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited for it. But yeah. So if you all want to see where this takes us, like keep listening and definitely join me in the Gardens of Mystic. The live program is going to be closed for the next 6 months. It won't open up until June, but the self-paced program is still open if you're interested in that. And you'll get all the recordings and all the replays of the conversations we have, and with all the tools and everything. But I'm very curious about where Dark Apollo is taking me.
Me too. That's so exciting.
It's just so strange because I never knew who he was. I didn't know I'm like, who the hell is this? Like, what is this? But it's the most beautiful mask. Like, it's a gorgeous mask. Like, think of like black matte paint with gold lines drawn on it. It's just beautiful.
Nicholas Pearson has been immersed in all aspects of the mineral kingdom for more than 30 years. The award-winning author of several books, including Crystal Basics, he offers classes online and in person around the globe. He lives in Orlando, Florida. Nicholas Pearson has been with us before, but we are very happy to have you back.
Welcome back.
Last time you were here, we talked about Crystal Basics and your book, Flower Essences from the Witch's Garden, which has been super influential. Actually, I quote you in my book coming out with Llewellyn this year, Sacred Wild, because your flower essences method is super inspiring. So anybody who ever asks me about flower essences, I just send them the direct link to that book for you.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I'm looking forward to your book.
Oh, thank you. I might be hitting you up soon for endorsements.
I'm always here to support.
Well, and so are we. And that is why when we heard about this book,
Yes.
Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense, and it happens to release right around as this episode's releasing, right around the US inauguration, it is the perfect jumping off point to provide our listeners with some empowerment for these next 4 years, hopefully only the next 4 years. Before we were recording, we were talking about how you wrote this book not knowing, of course, when it would release. But now, coming into this new era, what would be your advice for somebody who feels really unempowered right now, and they know they need to try to find that spark again? What would you say to them? What would be your advice?
Gosh, this is such a big thing, right? There's not a single piece of the puzzle that I think is going to impact everyone exactly the same way. So I think it's helpful to take a step back and kind of do some self-inventory. Empowerment, a sense of boundaries, a sense of security, the good kind of vulnerability versus the icky kind we're probably all still processing. These are related to so many different things. So we have to unravel some threads and see where we need the most support. And I think it starts with just the basic self-inventory of, am I grounded? Do I have space right now? And what can I do to see those two things through? And when the world is really hectic and frenetic, no matter where you are in the world's kind of on fire. I mean, it's not really kind of, it's actually on fire, both literally and metaphorically in different places. So it's a lot to process. A lot of this book is born out of my own experience as what I now might label a highly sensitive person, although I didn't have that language growing up. And if I'd known about the efficacy of just being more present with me and learning to separate what was mine from what wasn't mine early on, it would have made a big difference. So for folks that are really seeking that empowerment, get grounded. Grounding it's so multifaceted. Energetically, I like to think of grounding as the state of reciprocal exchange with the earth. It's not just I'm touching the earth, I'm on the earth, I'm at earth. It's I'm in relationship. I'm experiencing embodied connection with the earth. If we think, at least here in the US, of our power outlets, especially for big appliances, they have that third prong, the grounding prong, which is there as like a safeguard. If there's a short, if there's too much, too little, whatever, it's a safe place to discharge without breaking the appliance or the wiring in your house. So it's that twofold protection. And when it comes to becoming grounded from that energetic framework, it's like having that third prong where there is a safe place to discharge, but we can also receive from that outlet as well. And that's such a big part of it. And there's so many different ways we can do it. Obviously, the book is about crystals. Most people know me from my work with rocks. So, there are so many great grounding stones we can turn to. Pick your favorite, and it can come out of your backyard. Stones from your landscape are so incredibly nourishing and grounding and can be good for our psychic self-defense as well. And I think the other like really big component to this empowerment when we go like really big picture stuff is just being able to recognize what you've got space for in a given day. So we can call that having healthy boundaries. We can call that, good psychological self-inventory. We can call it a lot of things. But having tools of support that can help you filter out what is useful, what is true, what is accomplishable, what is your responsibility versus what isn't. At the end of the day, contributing to a better world is everybody's responsibility, but we're all going to do it in different ways. So if endlessly consuming the media cycle, especially around the time this episode is coming out, is bad for your mental health, it's not your responsibility to be that informed. Like you
Yes. Thank
probably
you for that.
yeah,
Yes.
right.
Yes.
And how many of us have been doom scrolling? I mean, social media kind of programs us to seek the dopamine reward anyway, but in the wake of more recent events worldwide, a lot of us just we're constantly looking for the update. We want to know what's coming next. We're trying to anticipate it, and it becomes this reflexive behavior. And maybe like unplugging is the best way for you to contribute to that safer, more secure, happier, healthier world. Maybe showing up in person someplace is better. Maybe retreating and cocooning is better. So when we really can understand what we've got the bandwidth for, I think it's going to be great. And having boundaries that kind of work in tandem with that is really useful. So I'm sure we'll get like more into the nitty gritty of like rocks for protection and like self-defense as the interview goes on. But I think one of my favorite kind of like all-purpose protection stones um, that's going to help us with these kinds of flexible, malleable boundaries is labradorite. It's one that I wear anytime I got to leave the house. I always keep one by the computer because it kind of helps me ensure that I have the right boundaries mentally, socially, emotionally, and spiritually when I'm doing my work online or with a manuscript or anything else. And it's I described it as like a selectively permeable membrane. If every cell of our body had a rigid, non-permeable barrier, they would all die. No waste could get out, no nutrients could come in. The exchange of products and proteins and other things that need to go to other parts of the body wouldn't get there. And the same is true for like the whole organism, energetically, spiritually. We have to have selectively permeable membranes. We have to receive light and goodness and healing and breath and prana and whatever we want to call those things. And we also have to be able to exhale the shit, for lack of a better way to put it.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and imagine so many of us as little witchlings, as young little metaphysicians and occultists, we learn about shielding, and we create these opaque, impermeable boundaries, and then we stew in our own juices all day long. And many of us drawn to these magical spaces as young people probably do so out of a need for finding greater balance and healing and transformation. And like the last thing I needed to do was stew in my own juices at that age because they weren't great. And I think labradorite is so great because it cranks up the amplitude of our light. It is shielding without being like conducive to isolation. It helps us build meaningful connection. It allows us to show up for people and events and places without taking stuff on. It's being empathetic without being overly and boundaryless empaths. And that's kind of like a big thing for me, is just being able to sort out what I can do and what is my responsibility to do. And it's just been such an ally for me that kind of was born out of need initially, because my other kind of protection devices weren't good in every situation. They were good in many, but I love how multifaceted, no pun intended, labradorite has become for me.
I like the pun though. Yeah, labradorite's one of my favorites too.
So is this labradorite? I don't know if you can even see it well
Yeah,
enough, but
absolutely. Yeah.
oh, so I got this at a thrift store. It actually had a little piece like to be a necklace, and that fell off really quickly, like the day I got it. And I'm really not like a huge crystals person, not in a bad way. I just find like I'm always very stressed about finding an ethically sourced one, and then I end up just not getting one. So if I find them at a thrift store, I feel more empowered because it's already there. So this one, and I still don't always get them if I see them at a thrift store, but this one called to me, and that's good to know because in my classes, I always teach people like you can't just put up a brick wall every day. Maybe there's times you do. Like I'm not a festivals person, so like I mean I am like if it's like a witchy one, but like like I went to the Cherry Blossom Festival in DC, for example. That was I will never do that again. That was way too many people. And you're in this like cattle chute and you
Yeah.
barely see the blossoms. Like, it is not my thing. And when I went there, that was the last time I can remember putting up a true to life brick wall. Or like when I was in Serbia, I went to Nice and there was like a protest against the Ukraine war for Russia, like pro Russia. So I put up a brick wall as I walked past that, But for the most part, I'm always telling people like, your bubble needs to be semi-permeable. Like for me, it's funny. This is labradorite because look it up, anybody who doesn't know what labradorite's like, but it has this sheen to it that is kind of like an oil slick vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when I do my shielding in the morning, I put it up around me like a soap bubble where it's clear, but you can sort of see the greens and purples, just like in labradorite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so fun bit. Part of the reason that like labradorite has taken on this role for me is that optical phenomenon. So the mechanics of that I find a really good metaphor, a really good like mechanism for what's happening energetically. So here's where like the mineral science nerd gets activated. So
Yes, do it.
so labradorite is a type of feldspar, and feldspars are a group of aluminosilicate minerals. We usually like plot them out on this little triangular graph. So we've got like a series from this point to this point, the top to one side and then along the bottom. And then there's like a chunk of that triangle missing where they don't mix together really well. So they kind of separate out. And along that bottom scale, we've got like potassium rich and calcium rich members. And so like every certain percentage of mixture gets its own name. So labradorite is approximately in the middle. It's slightly off to one side, but it approaches the middle. But because it's this mixture of different things, as it grows, they kind of sort themselves out. They separate into these like little twinned layers. And so those layers form really strong bonds called laminae, like from the same word as to laminate. So, stick those layers together. And they'll be varying thicknesses and slightly different compositions. And so they're going to bend light in slightly different ways. And the approximate thickness or thinness of those different layers, they're so tiny that they actually correspond to the wavelengths of light that we see. So the very, very thin layers are going to be our blues and violets and pinks, and the very, very thick layers are going to be like our oranges and reds. And so like the extremes of those, pink and violet and red and orange are appreciably rare in labradorite. Yellow, green, blue, which operate in like the broadest part of the visible light spectrum, is where most of the thicknesses are. Just by law of averages, it works out that way. And it's light coming through that gets diffracted back at us. So it allows some wavelengths to pass through a given layer with no qualification. It just does, and others get bounced back or scattered, diffracted. And that's kind of how I envision it working in our energy field. And that is the same phenomenon that we see in like an oil slick. We call that thin film interference. So depending on the thickness of that like soap bubble at any given moment, it'll diffract out a specific wavelength of light. And we're just seeing layer upon layer upon layer of that happening with labradorite. And our energy field is capable of that. It is resplendent, it is prismatic, it can be the oil slick, but we get depleted. We forget how magnificent and radiant and luminous we are. And so labradorite kind of steps in and says, hey, you got this. I'm here to support, but let's just round things out. Let's heal up a tear. Let's seal this off a little bit better. And your own light is what's going to protect you. I'm just here as like an extra safeguard.
I love that. So when I teach protection magic, we do it with herbs. So I teach with like Jimson weed and henbane, the ones that have that nuance of deception. So thinking of our shield, when I have my students raise their shield, I give the refractals, that layer of light that kind of distracts. So if they're protecting against a certain person, then put off something that distracts them. Oh, look, shiny, go over there. And so like labradorite absolutely mixes in with that. And it was intuitive for me to use labradorite. I have it by my bedside because I use it for protecting myself when I'm dream walking or astral travel. And wow, mind blown. I didn't realize I was doing that.
I love it. I love how like 3 different kinds of practices all converge with similar ideas right here. And that's
right.
That to me always speaks to like a greater truth here, because I I may not have like a formal science degree. I work in the science field in addition to doing this work. And I can't take like the skeptical brain out of the equation. And I just love seeing when people have their own empirical, firsthand, like personal gnosis kind of situations that still take us to the same things. Like obviously something's got to be happening for these patterns to emerge.
Of it, yes.
Exactly. Yeah, the syncretism ends up leading us back to science almost every time. It really is something. Now I can't stop looking at my labradorite. I'm super glad I know what this is now. I even tried a Google image search, but it came up with like 55 different options every time. I was like, but it couldn't see the refraction, like you're saying, in the images. Wow, that's really cool. Is your intuition tugging at you to deepen your relationship with your higher self? Do you feel like there is a greater mystery to your spiritual path and you're ready to go back to the roots of earth priestessing to discover it? Are you dreaming of caves, bowls of red roses, or having visions of barefoot women in white gowns? The priestess path is calling to you. This is an invitation to call on the oracle and be anointed in the Pythia's sacred spring at Delphi. I am inviting you to dance with the nymphs to the beat of my drum in an ancient forest. Let's meet the muses in the olive groves, swim with the mermaids, release your fears, and embrace the power of the priestess you know you are meant to be. If you're ready to meet the land spirits and oracles of Greece's most famous sacred site and beyond, visit seekingnoumena.com/Delphi retreat and sign up to join me. Early bird ends December 15th. I wanted to talk about something you talk about in a good bit of your books, programming a crystal for its work. How does somebody go about that? Because people will say, like, I got this crystal and started carrying it, but there's something we do before that.
Yeah. So, given that we've got kind of a witchy platform here, I want to kind of like lead us toward that direction. But we're going to start with like the language we see in a lot of the kind of overarching crystal movement, words like programming and charging, which we sometimes use interchangeably and we sometimes don't. And this book is like one of my first to really offer some nuance between the two. We see this language kind of emerge in the crystal world, like we'll say like peak volume 80s, early 90s. And it's coming from the influence of folks like Marcel Vogel, who worked in the computer field. He was a research scientist for IBM for almost 3 decades and left to study psychic phenomena and healing and particularly crystals. So he brought a lot of his computer lingo into that, including programming. And it's this idea that because of the nature of crystal lattices, because of the nature of how we might conceptualize the way they interact with our energy, our consciousness, we can instill a program, an intention, a goal. And we see the same thing in magical spaces from the word to charge, which, in the modern crystal world sounds a lot like I used this emerald and now it's run out of juice, so I got to plug it in to restore its battery. That's not how crystals work. And that's not what that word meant in magical spaces. To charge a magical object or ingredient is to imbue it with purpose. It is to collaborate with the spirit of it, to give it instructions. Like you can be charged with the responsibility of turning in a manuscript on time, hopefully. Or whatever it might be in your own life. I know what I'm thinking about currently. And that's where that comes from. But because our technology has changed, because we have so many handheld devices, we got to literally plug into a wall and charge. That's kind of carried over into our spiritual practice. So, programming has this connotation of being technical, computer-like, we'll say devoid of personality. And while that is one of the dominant terms in the crystal world, I do find a lot of witchy folks who like avoid it like the plague. And so whatever word you use, I just want to remind people that to work with a magical ally, whether it is a crystal, whether it is the spirit of place, whether it is a living plant, a bit of dried botanical material, an essential oil, the archetype of color, we are collaborating with the spirit, the intelligence, the essence of it beyond its material form or our ability to experience it with the five senses. So programming for me is always this collaborative approach. It's an invitation. It's, hey, let's coordinate our forces towards this outcome. Now, I am a lot less focused in more ways than one than any crystal is ever going to be. And so programming for me looks a lot like it does in the kind of greater metaphysical world of like, here's my affirmation, here's my intention, here's my visualization. And it seems kind of forceful to like generate this image, this intention, these words, and project it into the crystal. But as long as my framework is always first and foremost checking in, is this crystal like receptive to this? Is this the right tool? And that can be an intuitive knowing. That can be like, for me, it's often like really visceral. I'll go, okay, well, we're going to do some work with some fluorite today. I pick up a fluorite and I'm like, I'm going to go find another one. This one needs a rest, or this one has some other work it's doing. Other folks are going to be able to use words and get visual impressions or whatever else might be to communicate. But, ultimately programming is a way that we coordinate our forces. We got to wrangle our mind, our spirit, our heart, our body into the task at hand. And for some of us, that may be easier than others. And then we're also extending that invitation to not just the material form of this crystal, like, hey, you are a magical object that I'm using, but you are a magic ally. You are a spiritual essence. And this is my goal right now. I'm being vulnerable and sharing this goal with you. Will you help me with that? Even if those aren't the words we're doing, as long as we always have that framework internally, I find it changes the equation so much.
Oh, I love that. And that you said something about maybe this crystal has another job it's doing or some other work it's doing. That is something that I try to teach my students, because I feel like sometimes especially when we're coming from that commodification mindset where this is a commodity, it's just something I use, we're forgetting that if we're overusing our tools, we're overusing our allies, and we're not expressing that reciprocity and that intuitive relationship, then we're overloading our tools, we're overloading our intentions, and we're taking what we're intending for this project over here, and we're reallocating it to this project over here, and we're confusing the energies. I think that's something that we don't talk about enough in magical teachings and practices, that if you have an intention, you set it off to do that, and that project or that intention, let it go. And then use your intuition, use your relationships with your tools, with your allies, to find the right tool for the next job.
Exactly. And when we build that like spirit-led relationship, that consciousness-led relationship, because of the reciprocity of it, because of how we are collaborating versus commanding, you find that your allies are willing to work in areas beyond their textbook definition. So, I use these kinds of analogies all the time. If we're talking about finding the right crystal for the right job, let's say you need protection and you really love rose quartz, and it's not a traditionally protective stone, according to many. You just pick one up at the store and you go, okay, protect me. That's like waiting in line at the coffee shop and tapping someone on the shoulder and saying, hey, I need you to do my taxes. Are they an accountant? Can you hire them for that? Maybe you got really lucky, but also maybe not. But, maybe you have a really close friend who runs their own business, who's really familiar with taxes. Because you've built this relationship, they could help you if you ask for help. By the same token, when we find a crystal that we just build this like really deep soul-centered relationship with, or a plant, or anything else in our magical, I don't want to say toolbox because that's too inert, but our magical spirit family, our ecology of spirit, then those beings, those intelligences that we work with on a continual basis, especially the ones we give back to, they're going to show up for us in other ways. And I see this in my own life. Rhodonite is this really sweet, tender manganese silicate with small amounts of essential calcium in it. And so many people only focus on its ability to work on like grounding our emotional body, or, taking us to a sense of like psychological well-being, just kind of general, we'll say balance. It's more nuanced than that. But I also find it profoundly protective when I go out into public and have to engage with the public in like really vulnerable ways and like really be present, especially for hard stuff. So it's more than just mitigating my innate anxiety. It's helping me have more resilient emotional boundaries. And while I think rhodonite could take any of us there, like when I put on my rhodonite necklace, when I feel those beads against my skin, and I've worked with this one particular necklace for, I mean, more than a decade now, well more than a decade. I know I'm in safe hands, and I know that stone is going to help me in ways that are not just emotional. They are psychic, they are spiritual, they are physical in some ways. It's the sense of embodiment in a situation, the bodily spatial awareness that I get from wearing it that I might not get from another stone, even though we wouldn't classically associate those things with rhodonite. So yeah, connecting to our allies as more than these commodities is so key.
Yes. And that's so when you spoke in the beginning of the interview, we were talking about stones in general as like, power centers. And you said like it might be a stone from your land. That is exactly like where I try to guide people, like especially if you're in the same headspace as me, if you're listening to this, you're like, oh, every time I want a crystal, I just don't know if it's ethical. And I just don't know who. I mean, there are definitely very trustworthy, reputable sellers of crystals that you can find. But if you're in that place of like, I need to do this working now, I can't wait for that Etsy shipment to arrive, go to the land. And so many places in the world, there are natural stones of quartz. Like I would say quartz is probably the most common um, crystal that you could actually find on your land. Like here in Pennsylvania, I used to collect the crystals that I would find in our woods. I also find like field stones or just classic, who knows what it is, rock that you're going to find is going to be really powerful stuff. And there is also historical precedent for that. In Malta, particularly, I can speak to this. And actually also like the ancient Celts surrounding the area of Bath in the UK, they saw limestone as a sacred stone, even though that's the land they lived on, and it just was the land in a sense. It was really it was an extension of a land spirit's understanding, but they would take that and recognize that they were carrying the land with them, and so that was a protective thing for them. So I have a solar wheel that was carved from limestone from in Malta by a Maltese guy, and that's one of my favorite stones to work with, even though it's definitely not gonna. I don't. Maybe it is. Maybe limestone's in crystal books, but I feel like it doesn't quite get that that status very often. Um, but yeah, I like you said, like when you're building relationship, like you just that they're going to show up for you because they have before and you showed up for them. And so if you have a land-based practice and you dedicate yourself to the land you live on, the stones that when you need something and you say, hey, I need a stone for this, thinking about this inauguration and the new normal that is settling in, going to the land and grounding that there and then saying, hey, I need some support when I go about my day. Can you provide me with a stone? Your land is going to provide you with a stone every time.
Absolutely. And the idea of the commodification and other issues that there are with the mining and extraction industries, of which like the crystal sector is like the tiniest sliver. Like, yes, it is a multi-billion-dollar industry, but it pales in comparison to infrastructure and communications technology and transportation and all of the other things, cosmetics. Like we wouldn't believe the way that minerals are used in all of these other things and how the atrocities committed for mining and extracting those are just mind-blowingly egregious. And does that also happen in the crystal world? Sure. But like a lot of what we use in the crystal world is a byproduct of those other things, and the people doing those other things can in turn monetize the waste products that their employers don't care about. It's not true for all things, but certainly it is true of many. And so it's such a weird gray area. But thinking about this and thinking about the ethics of that, and wanting to provide people more options, I've turned to a lot of really common rocks. My last couple crystal books, including this one, Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense, and my little pocket encyclopedia, they have a lot of common rocks in them. Things like granite and marble and slate. Limestone is in the pocket encyclopedia, and it's it's the rock underneath my feet right now. I mean, anywhere I've ever been in Florida, there's been limestone as the bedrock beneath me. Sometimes like karst, which is this beautiful, almost Swiss cheese of limestone with water flowing through it. Our Floridan aquifer is literally embedded in the rock, and so there's this wonderful synergy between the calcium carbonate, the calcite of that limestone, and the water that moves through it, and it's almost electrical in its energy. So our central kind of like home shrine has a massive fossil laden crystal bearing piece of this karst limestone from north central Florida that a dear mentor gave to me, and it's almost like this powerful energy sink in our home. So it kind of serves as like an anchor point. It's like a central tether to the protective wards that I've got up. But because it's so deeply connected to the land, because it comes from this land, it's just an easy way to let something bigger than me handle the small stuff. I don't have to be as concerned about the day-to-day of protection in this space when this larger intelligence that's been around longer than the human race, when it's taken care of it, then I know I'm safe. And that's why we have spirit-led relationships. And that's kind of one of the differences we see in a lot of the healy-feely practices versus like the witchy, ooky, spooky ones. Neither is better than the other. They're just totally different frameworks. And I love kind of having a foot in both of those worlds, which I tried to do as gracefully as I could in this book. So I'm hoping there are practices that appeal to a wide variety of people. But yeah, I love limestone. I'm a sucker for it. In southwestern England, there's some pretty phenomenal limestones that I have some sitting on my altar just out of reach. And that's a space that feels like a home away from home for me. The moment I set foot there, I felt so connected. And
Me too.
yeah, we could all find more magic in the inert parts of our landscape, seemingly inert parts of our landscape, because the rock, the soil, the clay, the sand, whatever you got, it's full of magic.
Hey there, witches. Did you know that there's an entire community out there dedicated to you and your journey? The Rebel Mystic community is a space where I offer my decades of knowledge and experience to witches just like you. I do this through live events, monthly mentoring, monthly rituals, a book club, and other resources like workbook pages and meditations. There is even a complete self-paced course library you can access. Check the link in the show notes to learn more about this community and how to become a member. Blessed be.
So something we talk about a good bit is how baneful magic is one thing, the idea of like offering harm to somebody, sending that to somebody. But we often, Leandra and I, take the stance that banishings, bindings, cord cuttings are protective. They're not really baneful because you're not asking harm to go to anybody, but you want to protect your peace. What are your thoughts on that? And are crystals, how can people use crystals in these ways? I know you have a lot in the book about this too.
Yeah. So my personal ethos on this have changed a lot over the years, kind of oscillating between, I won't call them extremes. I've never really been into too many extremes in my life, but certainly oscillating between different poles. And my personal practice is guided by these two words: harm reduction. So what is going to reduce the greatest amount of harm? And that's what I want to focus on. So sometimes it's putting up wards. Sometimes it's shielding myself. Sometimes it's creating that little protective amulet or gifting someone that cute little pocket rock that we have invited to collaborate on their protection. We've programmed it for their protection. And that's all it takes. That will reduce the greatest amount of harm in a situation. We don't need anything more drastic. Other times people are really out to get you. I mean, like actual ritual curse and psychic attack, like formal attack is rare in the grand scheme. It exists by the droves, but I mean, we're more likely to encounter other sources of psychic and magical harm than those specifically. But when those are happening, like we go straight to the source. So maybe that's binding or banishing. Maybe that is just trying to do a reversal of the situation. Maybe we want to focus on ourselves with, like a kind of cleansing on crossing and like really deep protective work afterwards. So we just kind of excise those energies from us and seal us in something better. That's a case where we want a less permeable boundary, of course. And other times we say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to take this stuff anymore. And I would like you to have all of this back with interest. And that's the only way things can be better sometimes. And, historically, in recent history, a lot of people have viewed crystals with, we'll say, less seriousness when it comes to this kind of working. Maybe we get some like dark colored, usually black stones because, culturally we want to make them bad or make them heavy or, whatever. So we might see things like jet and obsidian and maybe onyx kind of like approaching this territory in modern crystal lore. But the truth is that like gems, minerals, ores have been used in this kind of baneful work for a really long time. I know that in the greater occult revival, we've got this burgeoning interest in stuff like the curse tablets and binding tablets, the difixiones of like Hellenistic practice. And they're often made out of lead. And first, that was probably just like a convenience factor. Lead is accessible, it has a low melting point, it's easy to bend and pierce and inscribe. They were already writing on it. But like over time, people began to associate those tablets, not just with the utility of lead, but also like, what about its material form is befitting of a curse? What about the dullness, the lifelessness of lead compared to the precious metals? Can we lend to this curse? If we also look at Cyprus, for example, there are dozens and dozens of examples of these Cyprian curse tablets that are inscribed on a rock that a lot of like love and lighters would go, oh no, that's not possible, and it's selenite. There are some exquisite examples of these in the British Museum. There are probably others elsewhere. I just haven't seen them myself yet. And they're inscribed with some pretty heavy hitting incantations and requests. And maybe part of that, it was the availability and accessibility of selenite. But, I also think of this stone as, so it's a hydrated calcium phosphate mineral. It forms from the dehydration of other stuff. It is almost like a product of the breakdown, the decay of other things in the environment, whether that's the shrinking of ancient seas or other stuff. So it has this quality that we can use to kind of, shrink negative influences in our lives. So, if you've got an inexpensive chunk of selenite that you could inscribe your curse on, you can do something people did thousands of years ago. We also find in, the modern witchy world, a lot of interest in baneful plants. Certainly in my flower essence book, I devote a lot of time to our baneful and poison plants because I love them. But the same kind of influences can be attributed to baneful minerals, toxic minerals, though they should be handled with great care, just like toxic plants. They have like these profoundly transformative properties. So things that are rich in lead and arsenic and other things, always handle them with extreme care. If you don't know what that means, you probably shouldn't work with them, or you should start with like learning the basics of safe mineral handling before you add them to your collection. There are a lot of things that get labeled toxic that are probably fairly safe to handle, but extra caution is always better than too little caution. And there are things that we can also similarly use. So, those lead tablets, maybe at the time people didn't know they were poisonous. We know that ingesting lead is pretty bad for you. You could also work with lead minerals like galena and vanadinite and vulfanite, pyromorphite, lots of other ites that are even harder to say. So I won't try on camera this early in the morning, but those kinds of stones can be so good for like fighting fire with fire. And you sometimes have to meet things with equal force. My friend and mentor, Christopher Penzak, in a lesson on protection magic says that, if we are adept enough to bounce the metaphorical bullet back to its sender, we're also probably adept enough to just remove it from play altogether. And most of the time, that is the best form of harm reduction. Sometimes, however, those projectiles keep coming. until we get them back to their source. So that's why harm reduction is always what I'm aiming for, because yes, in the ricochet, we can potentially put others at risk, energetically speaking, but if we are adept enough to ensure it goes where it needs to, sometimes that's what you got to do. So I do have a few tools and techniques for that in this book, which is not something you find in your average crystal book. And that was really calculated on my part. I wanted to have a little bit more tooth and nail in this book. Um, and hopefully people understand these are last resort kind of things. Like I never want to use them. I would always rather go for we'll say less heavy things, but sometimes the situation demands it. And I think we're entering a phase where a lot of people are going to feel the need, feel the gravitas of that, and will need some heavier tools.
Especially when there's things out of your control that you can't directly control it through legal means or discussion or anything like that. You will have to protect yourself when it comes down to it. And I love that you put that in here, that people can use a little more tooth, a little more fire when the fire comes to us. Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Wheel of the Year Book Club is open for new members. If you would love to join a witchy book club with other wonderful witches to get to know, join us on Patreon at the Dedicate tier or higher to participate in our book club that meets every 6 weeks around the Wheel of the Year holidays. Our next book is Consorting with Spirits by Jason Miller, and we will be discussing that on February 13th at 7 p.m. EST. I'd love to see you there. Visit patreon.com/Elise Wells to join. So what are some ways in this new phase of life that we are all starting to figure out our place in and our ways to maintain our power? What are some ways that you would say somebody can begin using crystals? And maybe what are some crystals people would be maybe surprised to find out would be useful for psychic self-defense?
Yeah. So, starting from the inside out, starting from the place of being grounded, being shielded, being warded at home, like I like to kind of gradually widen our sphere of influence outwards from there. So I got a real, I won't call it too hefty because I pared it down quite a bit, but I've got a healthy number of psychic shields in the book that use either the physical stone as your touchstone, your talisman for generating them, or as a metaphor, a symbol for how you want them to function. So there are so many things that we can work with that are going to help us with that shielding from any member of the quartz family, clear quartz being probably the most broad spectrum of them. Labradorite we already talked about. You could look at something like hematite, which is going to be nice and reflective and heavy, but also like some less appreciated minerals, like larvikite is one that I really love as a kind of invisibility shield. No, you won't. You won't disappear in front of your friend's eyes, but to just make your energy field less detectable to outside influences. When talking about things like more generalized protection for this phase we're entering. One that I wish more people cared about. One, because it's a common ingredient in metamorphic rock, so it's inexpensive to mine and inexpensive to buy, and because of its abundance, probably isn't. I'm speculating here, but I'm imagining isn't causing undue stress on most places where it is extracted, and that's bronzite. So bronzite is a trade name we give to metamorphic rock made of something called ferroenstatite. It's iron rich, and it has these little kind of reflected bronze colored patches in it when you polish it, and it's soothing and gentle, but it's great for stamina, for endurance when we feel depleted. Sometimes it's considered a stone of like tact and courtesy. And I kind of translate that to like not losing your head when things are urgent. It's not just being overly nice. It's knowing how to use our words, our behaviors effectively in, we'll say, high-strung situations. It's a stone that helps us feel more secure in body as well. So maybe we're concerned about the direction of our neighborhood, like What's going on? Maybe we're just really having trouble calming down our bodily response to world events. Bronzite can be such a great ally for that. Another one that I talk about in the book is granite. Granite is phenomenal. Depending on where you live in the world, granite is probably very abundant. Not for me, but if I look through gravel in a parking lot, I might find some. And it's such a great ally because it's a mixture of different things. It's an igneous rock, so it's got some quartz in there. It's got lots of feldspar, usually mica, often biotite mica, but you can find granites that have dozens of accessory minerals. So its exact makeup is going to be a little bit different from each part of the world. So they've all got their own personality, and it's good for being in touch with the land, being in touch with community. Our only way forward, not just for 4 years, but the next chapter of Earth is going to be through mutual support systems. It's going to be a communal and hopefully more decolonial approach to well-being, to health and happiness, to success. It's not so much the individualistic and isolationist kind of view of success that late-stage capitalism wants us to believe is best for everybody. But maybe a way forward is by being in community, the way all those members of that igneous rock are in community, and how they each bring something to the table that makes granite wonderful. So there's just so many great rocks. I've got 145 of them in the book. Some are really common. Some are inspired by my travels to England. So you're going to find some interesting British rocks, not just English, but broader than that. You're also going to see some things that I think really deserve more space when we talk about protection, because it's not always about putting up walls. It's about, what do we do when we're already depleted? What do we do when we've already experienced psychic harm? How do we recover from that? And you need warm and fuzzy things. I know we're all serious occultists here, TM, but we need joy. We need wonder. We need awe. And we have to learn how to cultivate those things, because the media cycle is going to suck us dry. And there's not going to be space for wonder and awe in those. So you're going to find the warm and fuzzies like lepidolite and aventurine and my beloved rhodonite. They're in this book. Some of them have a protective, barrier kind of function to them, but a lot of them are also really good for recovery, recuperation, regeneration. We need those to cultivate resilience. And if we do not focus on resilience, it doesn't matter how strong you go in, you won't have anything left coming out of this fight. You might last a week, you might last all 4 years, you might have nothing left after those 4 years. So we have to really embrace a broad spectrum of work, of allies, of activities, not just the great work of these next 4 years and beyond, but also the work of our lives. We are the alchemical crucibles in which transformation takes place. We are the microcosm that is a reflection of the macrocosm. If you want to see a more resilient and joyful world, you need to have those qualities in you in abundance so you can share them with others. If you desire a safe space in the world, you have to be a safe space for yourself and others. And so there are crystals that kind of reflect all those different aspects of this work. And I wished, the list was a lot longer than 145. If I could have put in 445 in, I might have tried. But it's just find those stones that are those things to you, whether or not they're in the book, and those are the right allies to work with.
Yes.
Yeah. And I love the way you brought in community and being that safe space. As you were speaking about the different crystals, I thought of it as create a community of crystals in your life. What are the crystals that stand for the inner child work that you need to do to keep yourself sane, like aventurine? And then what are the crystals that do bring in the multifaceted levels of, maybe we need protection from those bullets that keep coming, that we need to reverse back. Maybe we also need some to send them. I love that quote. Chris Penzak. We just had him on the show as well. Just unreal. We are so blessed to have a teacher like him in our world,
awesome.
In our lifetimes. Yeah. All those things working together and building that community. And I have some wisdom I'd like to share from a different rock, Dwayne The Rock Johnson, I was watching.
I love it.
I was like, so as soon as I was like thinking of this to share, I was like, oh my gosh, it's actually wisdom from a rock. So I was watching an interview with oh, I don't remember her name. I actually didn't know who she was at all. And then I watched the interview and I was really glad I did, with the woman who plays Moana. And she was saying that as she's been going through her career, Mr. The Rock Johnson gave her the advice that never step on people to climb to where you want to get. Make sure you always take people with you, because if you fall, they will help you back up. And I feel I that resonated with me really hard, because that's how I feel about our witchy community, the occult world, the new age community. We really are all holding each other's hands again and again in every way. And when, like, for those listening out there, you are part of that too. Like, our community starts with us. We are that safe space. And when we decide to do that, when we decide to be that, and all we have to do is extend our hands and someone's going to take them. And then they become that safe space and they become that community. And I think that's what crystals can do for us. They can be this literal, like, I'm thinking of grids, you know, they can be this literal like representation, kind of like the opposite of those like medieval kings that have those boards where they're like planning war. We're planning peace with these crystals, and we're looking at it and we're saying, okay, I want to manifest this thing.
I love that image. And it's not even just grids, like it's the planet. When we pick up a rock, a pebble, a fossil, a precious gemstone, we are holding part and parcel of the body of Mother Earth. And Mother Earth is what she is for all its components. For every mineral resource, every seam of ore, every unopened geode, every speck of sand, but also every one of us, every mighty tree and microorganism, every mountain, the bottom of every ocean, like we are all part of this greater thing. And it is such a colonial worldview to separate ourselves out from that, to put ourselves at the top of the food chain, so to speak, instead of remembering that we are a grid, we are a network, we are a web. And it comes back to this idea of collaboration instead of competition, of cooperation and invitation to participate with these allies. And if all we've got bandwidth for is like taking the inert piece of magical object and putting it in our pocket because we are just dead to the world, okay, do that. Celebrate that you did something. And then like check in on that. Cleanse it. Give it a breath, fresh air to, not have to deal with heavy stuff for an hour or two at some point. And that's building relationship, even though you might not be invoking the spirit of that stone in a very technically complicated ritual. You can still cooperate in so many little ways. And I see one of the hallmarks of going forward is this idea of collaboration, community, cooperation. It's checking in on the people who need it. It's raising hand to say, hey, the person who needs it is me. Who can support me? We don't always do that, and especially when we have to lead public facing lives as the people who write books and show up on podcasts and do that kind of thing, it's like daunting to be that vulnerable, but it's also up to us to remind people that we are people just like they are, and if we can ask for help, if we can show up, if we can have the whole range of human experience, so can they. So yeah. Just like the stones are in community, we've just forgotten it, and they never have, and they never will. Doesn't matter. I'm holding an emerald from Ethiopia. It's not disconnected from its homeland just because it's traveled, because it is still in relationship to the body of Mother Earth. The only way to do anything otherwise, the only way to separate this from that energy field, from that consciousness, would be to like make it part of a payload and launch it into space. And let it just go and go and go. And I think in the grander scheme of things, it's probably still in relationship, but at least in terms of the electromagnetic field of the Earth goes, it's eventually going to leave that, right? Otherwise, it's always connected. It's always part of that. And so are we, but we just don't remember that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like community, it shows up in so many different ways. Like my work is with herbs, primarily herbs, but I'm still working with the minerals because the herbs have they're that transformative body that bring that mineral into my body or into my work. So I'm still working with these minerals without directly doing it. So there's that example of how we're all interconnected. We're all that network. And we forget that community shows up in sometimes subconscious or hidden ways that we don't always see directly. We're like, oh, wait, that person has always been there for me. Or, okay, that herb has always been there for me, but what else is connected to that herb? It could go so deep and a whole other podcast.
It is always beyond a pleasure to have you on this show. I love our conversations. I love the work you're putting out into the world. The prolific work, might I add. This is book what exactly?
How many?
This is number 9. 10 will be out later this year. The show's coming out in January. So later
2035.
By the time people hear it. And then early 2026, probably book number 11 will be out. The first draft will be done by the time people hear it. I'm speaking that into existence.
Maybe so.
And then
so it is.
I'm not sure what comes next. I think maybe a break from writing. Who knows?
You're so young. I mean, that's what's incredible to me is like you can hit that witch's dozen, eventually take a break and just incredible. The world's lucky to have you in it, and I'm really glad to have you on the show a second time. And it was just the perfect message. I hope people feel a bit more empowered after listening.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you both so much. It's always a pleasure to be in conversation in community with you. And I just hope people get some value out of the book. Find one tool that helps them, then I know the book is doing its job.
For sure.
And tell people, before I always forget to ask this, but where they can keep up with you, where you prefer them to get your books, if that's possible, and anything you want to share coming up.
Yeah. So, as far as where to get the book, my motto has always been every copy sold is a good copy sold. So whatever is accessible for you, please go find your local indie bookstore and ask them to carry at your local crystal shop or witch shop. I'm sure they'd be delighted to get that for you. But if you live in the boonies, the other thing you can do is Amazon Prime. Do Amazon Prime. Like find what works for you and your lifestyle. But it's officially out in early January, so it will be available and ready to ship by the time you hear this interview. It's called Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense: 145 Gemstones for Banishing, Binding, and Magical Protection. And if you want to keep up with me, just look for The Luminous Pearl, whether that's .com or at The Luminous Pearl on most social media. I'm most active over on TikTok, but I'm going to have a lot of stuff coming up this year to celebrate the birth of this book, from online events and more media outreach and podcast interviews like this. Lots of live Q&As on Instagram, some in-person events. So just find me somewhere. Maybe even sign up for a newsletter on my website, and I'll let you know where I'm going to be.
All right.
You're at Sacred Space this year, right?
I
am not. No,
you're not. Okay. I'm trying to
maybe
remember
next year.
Maybe next year. Yeah, that's a good place to hang out.
Yeah, we're still, as of recording, we're still getting our 2025 in order, but I really hope that we run into each other. Are you going to be at Mystic South?
I haven't decided, but it's looking like I will be able to. Like, my calendar should be free. Outside of this, I'm really active in like music, and I'm trying to make sure music isn't coming at the detriment of my career, and that my career isn't coming at the detriment of music. But one of these things pays bills, and the other one costs me a lot of money. So, so
I feel that.
This past year, my priorities were a little reversed. And summer is when like ensembles are quiet. So I think there's a good chance I'll do Mystic South this year.
Awesome. Yeah, we're in the same boat. So hopefully we will actually see each other in person one of these days.
Maybe this year. Sounds good. Merry meet,
merry part, and merry meet again.
Thank you for joining us on the Magick Kitchen podcast. Please visit my website, leandrawitchwood.com, for news, information, and more episodes.
I'm Elise Wells, and I can be found at Seeking Numina on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and seekingnumina.com. That's Seeking, Numina.